Okay, welcome everybody to our webinar today. Folks are slowly coming in. So we're going to get started in about a minute or two. So go ahead, get that maybe third cup of coffee for today. I know I have. And we'll get started in just a minute. Thanks so much. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started today. It's great to see you all here today. My name is Michael Ibrahim, and I'm Program Manager with the Cultural Investment Portfolio here at the Mass Cultural Council. The Cultural Investment Portfolio's focus is grants and services for nonprofit cultural organizations, and we are super excited to deliver today's workshop to you. It's called Adaptive Arts Leadership During COVID-19 and Times of Crisis. This workshop is part of the Mass Cultural Council's Recover, Rebuild, and Renew efforts to help organizations come back from COVID-19. This spring, we are offering 2 free workshops every week, all the way until the end of June, in the areas of financial management, legal issues, human resources, advocacy, management, and governance. As Charles, my colleague, has already mentioned, feel free to put your name in the chat, where you're from, if you want to include your title, pronouns, that would be lovely. Joining us today are Sarah Stackhouse and Heather Field Stern from Broadband Collaborative. We're going to start in just a minute, but I did want to go through just a few ground rules before we get started. As you've probably noticed already, this session has automatic captioning. Auto-generated captions are provided on all Mass Cultural Council Zoom meetings and webinars. To request additional accommodations to ensure your participation for future webinars, please let us know when you register. If this is distracting for you, you can always hide this by clicking Hide Subtitles in the closed captioning options. That should be at the bottom of Zoom. We will have time for questions and answers. That's a big part of today's conversation. We do ask that you please use the Q&A function and not the chat in order to ask questions. It just helps us organize and condense similar questions and kind of be organized throughout the day. So thank you for using the Q&A there. This session is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel starting tomorrow. We try to turn these around pretty quickly. You will get an email from me when this is ready, and all the materials that Sarah and Heather have created will also go out at that time. My colleague Charles Baldwin is here, and he is providing some resources in the chat box as we go along. And we have this session for 90 minutes and includes time for questions and answers. And with that, I'll turn it over to our experts, Sarah and Heather.
Hello, welcome. We are excited to be here today to talk with you and share some examples about adaptive arts leadership, especially during this time of COVID-19 and in times of crisis. So we are kind of plowing through and trying to figure things out as it applies to how we move forward as an organization, how we move forward as artists in this time. So this presentation is going to be full of all different types of images, but they're more background images. Most are black and white. And if an image is specific to what we are speaking about, we will explain it when we come to that slide. The first slide, so you can go ahead and adjust to the next slide, Justin, is we're going to jump into part one. And this is an image which I think really speaks to all of the arts leaders who started on this journey a year ago, wondering what was ahead. And we really had no clue what was to come. So it's a picture of a dirt road with some southwest type of uh, foliage and fauna, and we leading into the mountains, and we really didn't know where we were going to go. So I'm Heather Stern, and I was a arts professional for the majority of my career in New York. I was a Broadway stage manager, and then became an arts administrator. And when we relocated to Boston, I worked as the general manager for Actors Shakespeare Project. And now I'm a full-time faculty member at Suffolk University, teaching arts administration and stage management. And one of the really interesting things that happened as COVID-19 hit and the murder of George Floyd was that the Broadway community became a lightning rod for anti-racist movement. And for the theater department at Suffolk University, we have worked with a lot of our BIPOC alumni and students and are building a path to a more equitable and diverse theater curriculum that will send our new budding artists out into the field with anti-racist DNA, I guess you would say. We have no clue where we're going to end up. The chair of our department, Marilyn Plotkins, has been an incredible advocate for this movement and has worked hard to educate herself and make it possible for the faculty and staff to educate themselves. And so that's one of the moments of adaptive leadership that I've seen play out in my own life, and following adaptive leaders and then trying to model that as well. My partner in crime is Sarah Stackhouse, and I'm going to let her come on and kind of introduce herself.
Thanks, Heather. So excited to do this with you and to see so many colleagues who I've learned so much from in the participant group. So I guess that's a great thing about what the Mass Cultural Council is doing, is that we're such a learning field and such a learning community, and it's great to have different people come forward at different times and share. And we're grateful to get to do that today. My name is Sarah Stackhouse. I am a producer and arts administrator, and I right now am working with a company that I founded with two female colleagues, Lori Taylor and Kristen Canterbury Bagnall. And our goal is to expand possibilities for artists, educators, organizations, and institutions. And it's been a really interesting moment to launch that business and think about, what does it mean to expand possibilities in a landscape that we don't understand? And it really brings forward this question about adaptive leadership. And I want to just tell a quick story as part of my introduction, that in 2006, I was so privileged to be part of this group of arts leaders that did this this 3-year course, or 18-month course maybe, at the Kennedy School that was supported by the Mass Cultural Council and some other Boston funders. And we read this book called it's called Leadership on the Line, but it's really a book about adaptive leadership by Ronnie Heifetz and some of his colleagues. And the concept of technical leadership versus adaptive leadership was a new idea to me, and it has shaped so much of my thinking. And so we really want to share some of those ideas as a foundation, and then other things that we have learned and gathered that might support all of us in figuring out how to adapt our leadership in this moment. One thing that Ronnie Heifetz says is adaptive leadership is needed when the crisis you're in requires knowledge and experience that's outside of what you have. And so you actually can't pull on your usual highly skilled set of solutions. And all of us have probably been in moments where there's a leadership crisis or a conflict or a social movement that comes up that affects our organization or our initiative or our classroom. But this moment that we're in right now, we are all in it at the same time together. And it's not just one, pandemic, it's a bunch of them. And so thinking about how it's outside of all of our knowledge and experience. And so these principles around how do you approach leadership and how do you think differently is really what we want to get into today. And the last thing I want to say is that there are a lot of amazing offerings that the MCC has through this series. And a lot of them are highly technical and they're so valuable. Like legally, how do you do something or what's possible? Or in terms of bookkeeping or in terms of rethinking a skill set, those are incredible. And we need those technical skills. And I think in this moment, we also need these adaptive skills as the other side of it, which is rethinking, reframing. How do we approach? And how does that change what we do? So that's what we're here to do today. And we're so grateful you're with us. Heather, you want to run through what we're going to do?
Sure. So the agenda for the day, we've broken it down into 3 parts. We're in the midst of the explore. Who are you as a leader? And then we will dive into how to adapt new approaches to leadership. And then we'll kind of wrap it up with reframing, looking through the lens of those new approaches to see how you view your staffing, your budget, your finances, your programming differently. And then we'll end with a Q&A.
Okay. So I want to skip this for a second, Justin, and can we just go to the mentee page? Okay, so what we thought would be interesting for us to do and interactive with all of you is to ask you to take your phones out and open your browser and go to menti.com. And it's going to ask you for a code, and the code is on the screen. It's 8767-2065. And you can see it in the chat and on the screen for a minute. We're going to keep it there for a second. One of the things that's been really helpful to me in my kind of growth as a leader was work I did with Mark Zegans, who's a brilliant consultant. And when I was in my 30s and I was a young executive director, he asked me to make a list of all of the metaphors for leadership that I sometimes thought about or embodied. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, is it leader as commander? Is it leader as cheerleader? Is it leader as parent? Is it leader as coach? Like, what are your metaphors and what are the things that you draw on regularly when you say, when I see a leader as this, and that's where I live. And we just wanted to invite all of you to go onto Menti and put in 3 words. 3 words that speak to who you are as a leader and the metaphors that you see. It could be cheerleader. It could be driver. It could be listener, but let's get some words from you about what metaphors you have for leadership. And as you do that, Justin, who is our production assistant and is running this, thank you, Justin, is going to actually share the word cloud on the screen so that we can get a kind of sense of the room. So hopefully you all are doing that. And Justin's going to share his screen, and let's get some of your, let's get some of your words up there and going. And you'll see that it evolves as more words come in. And we'll just let it play and take a look and see what you see. I love that listener is at the center.
Yes, and it's remained at the center along with visionary and supporter.
Yep. And some of the other keywords we see here: guide, mentor, supporter. That's a big new one. Coach. And we just thought it would be interesting so you can kind of see how the other folks that we're all here together today, how are we thinking about leadership normally in our regular toolbox? And we're going to take a screenshot of this and have it as a sort of documentation. And at the end, after we talk, we may do it again and see whether it's just the same and stronger or whether it shifts. And that's more of a documentation thing, but it's also a way for us, because we can't see all your faces, to kind of make sure that we are in contact with everyone's thinking in the room. All right, beautiful. Let's take that down and let's start talking about adaptive leadership. Justin's going to bring our slideshow back up in the control room.
It was really interesting. All of the words were very supportive. You know, there was a lack of power, words like power or words that, you know, were top heavy.
All right, Justin, thanks. Can you go to the next slide? All right, Heather.
All righty, we're going to, for part 2, we're going to reframe your approach to leadership and really look at how we see leadership and if we can't find some new perspectives. So the first one we're going to dive into is technical versus adaptive leadership, which Shara has already kind of talked about, Ronnie Heifetz's book. Second is context matters. And the third is changing your perspective with 4 different types of leadership that we've isolated out that we think are important: values-based, service-based, courage-based, and humor-based.
All right, so I want to talk some more about technical versus adaptive leadership and just define our terms. And I really recommend this book, Leadership on the Line. It is the book I recommend it to people when they say, oh my gosh, you won't believe what's going on at my organization right now. We don't know what to do. Because it is about that moment when you don't know what to do. And one of the things it takes on is this idea of authority and leadership, and that your role is to diffuse and solve. Decisive, confident, strong leadership. Even if you do it with your board or with a group, that it may be hard, but you kind of know how to work it out, and you diffuse the situation and you come up with a solution. That's technical leadership. One of the things Ronnie Heifetz talks about in this book is surgeons. Somebody may have a very complex, arm break, and it may take incredible skill and nuance and research and careful work from someone very skilled, but they know how to fix the arm, and they go in and they fix the arm. That's technical. Doesn't mean it's not highly valued, but you kind of know how to do it. I think the question of adaptive leadership is one that I think we don't speak enough about, and we actually don't have enough of a comfort zone about. So I just wanted to share a couple of attributes of how do you know when adaptive leadership is needed? How do you define what needs to happen? And hopefully this will be some grounding for our conversation today. So first of all, adaptive, can you go back, Justin? I want to stay on the other one for a second. Thanks. So first of all, the whole group is part of the problem. That's one of the things that when you know you need adaptive leadership is when there's a persistent problem that keeps coming up in different forms, and it actually has to do with your whole organization. Maybe some beliefs, maybe some biases, loyalties, practices, and actually unless those shift, the problem's not going to get solved. It's not just that you need to get in a room and do a budget item, cut a budget item. So that's one thing that I think. Another thing is that it requires experimentation. And experimentation, I think as artists, a lot of people in this room are used to thinking about experimentation, but often in terms of leadership and financial management, programming, you often want very decisive action, and experimentation feels messy. But adaptive leadership requires it because you don't know the answer. So you have to try stuff and learn and fail. Crisis often reflects that you need to do some adaptive work. Adaptive work requires that people need to learn, and that we're all going to learn together. The other thing is, there are 2 other points I want to bring up. One is the idea that you have to have a different kind of conversation when it's time for adaptive leadership and adaptive change. It's not that you're trying to come up with answers. It's that you're actually framing some questions or framing a process that allows you to dig into something, and you don't know where you're going to end up. So it's not, we want to be here, how are we getting there? It's, we need to change, we don't exactly know where we're going. How are we going to get there? What questions do we need to ask? And my favorite quote of his, which I'm going to end with, well, it's more of a reference to an idea than a quote, is that when you do technical solutions, there's a big problem, you tackle it, you dissipate it, and you get back to normal. When there's an adaptive issue, you actually have to maintain a productive range of distress and a productive range of disequilibrium and help the group stay there, meaning there's no quick fix. And for any organization in this room who is going through racial equity discussions, you know you can't have a meeting and solve it. You have to actually create conditions and hold them where there's distress and disequilibrium, or you can't change. And I think there's a bit of an art to that, because to a lot of people that feels like something's really wrong. But actually what it means is you are actually going to start changing the thing that is wrong and maybe end up somewhere else. And those are just some of the core ideas I wanted to underline. And I hope this resonates with people, because I see some of the current contexts that we're in that require adaptive leadership. We don't know how audiences behave anymore. We can't just solve it based on old data or what we know or what we don't know. We don't know what racial equity really looks like in our arts organizations, in our schools, in our cities. We have some vision about it. We don't quite know how to get there. We don't know how to talk about it. That's a big issue. And we have to stay in a state of distress and disequilibrium that is supported and led in order to work through that. The COVID issues around health and are huge for people. We don't know where that's going to be. How do we plan? And finally, the economics, which I am guessing is probably in some ways the most urgent pain point for a lot of folks, because they don't know how they're going to pay people. They don't know if they're going to have income. They don't know what grantors are going to do. And so how do we lead when that's true and not fall into, okay, I have my skill set, I'm going to get my people in a room, we're going to solve this, but instead maybe do something else. And that's what we're inviting today.
Sarah, I just wanted to say, so, what we've discovered is that the questions are the most important thing, not the resolution, not the solutions. The questions being asked to the larger community and of your staff are the most important part of adaptive leadership. I was thinking, I heard a story, Sarah, about a pizzeria in Brooklyn that the majority of their business was single slices. So when 70% of their business was just pizza by the slice. So they had no business when COVID hit, when everything shut down. Well, they, through kind of an adaptive leadership process, which I'm sure they won't call it that, or don't even know the term, but they figured out that they had pizza ovens hot enough that they could order industrial strength, medical grade plastic, and they could actually make face shields. So they were able to transition in a very creative, adaptive way to actually address the need of the moment. And now when we go back to whatever normal is, which I don't think we will, but now this pizzeria might have two streams of revenue that are completely different, but they were able to adapt in a moment that was a creative way of looking at the problem.
Right. And so let's go to the next slide, because what you're talking about is understanding context.
Yep.
And so this slide has, for people who need this slide described, it has it's like the side of a train station. And it's a big perspective from a broad view near us to a very narrow view down the tunnel. And one of the things that is an incredible approach in moments of crisis and adaptation is making sure that you are looking at the issue from a variety of perspectives. And at the company I'm part of, Broadband, we formed our company so that we would be multi-perspective. And when we have an issue, we don't say, oh, this is your bailiwick, you take care of it. We look at it from multiple perspectives. It takes a little time, but we have a much better path forward. Let's go to the next one, Justin. Terms that Ronnie Heifetz brings up and that we love are thinking, how do you view things from the balcony? So this is a slide from the air looking at a twisty road. If you're on that road, you do not see this. And sometimes, I mean, this may seem like like interesting things we're talking about, but how do you really apply it? But if you're thinking about your budget process, you may need to go to the balcony and just think about, like, what's the point of a budget process? What are we asking the right questions in this budget process? Should we follow our regular, what should be our values behind this process, rather than we have to follow this process? And you might not see that until you get to the balcony. The next view we have here is the weeds. And the weeds, I think, is important because it suggests that there are a whole bunch of people on the ground doing a bunch of things, and they all see things, and you don't see them when you're the leader. You don't know them unless you get down and look at them from that perspective. And often it is some subversive idea from an inside person, or something that you don't bump up against, but your colleagues do, that helps you understand what's needed. And so a practice when you're looking at any of these issues is to make sure you go balcony, weeds, balcony, weeds. And I will say that I worked that way a long time, and then I started working with Heather. And Heather introduced this really beautiful idea, which is how we've partnered together on a number of things, about leading from the middle and how you have that perspective. Do you want to say a word about that, Heather?
Sure. It's really interesting because when you lead from the middle, you have to figure out how to communicate up to the balcony and then back down to the weeds. And sometimes those communication techniques appear to be very different, because the people in the balcony hear information one way, whereas the people in the weeds hear information a different way. So it's about translating. It's about figuring out what the people need and what they need to be effective and, part of the work, and what they need to do the work. It is, yeah.
Yeah.
So
and I'll say this too. We're not just talking about balcony and weeds in terms of hierarchy. We're also talking about balcony and weeds in terms of context, like what is happening in your neighborhood, what is happening in your world, what is happening for the women in your community, what is happening with the people of color in your community. Those are contexts that you see from the balcony that if you're just looking at your organizational issues, you may not see. And vice versa. I do know quite a few leaders who are brilliant big picture thinkers and strategists, and they're not in touch with what is happening on the ground, and they miss great ideas. And they do it partly because their process is one way. And so those voices aren't in there. And so if you adapt your process, you might actually find a new path. And we just think this is a really important idea around perspective taking.
There's a great example, I think, through our organization, the Mama Project, in when the pandemic hit and everything closed down, we realized that, we have a nonprofit organization that creates art with women of all different cultures, cross race, cross socioeconomic boundaries, and
in Africa.
In South Africa. And we realized that we weren't going to be able to go and do the work that we had planned on doing. And the communities of women that we are in relationship with were look forward to, us, and not us coming, but getting together with all these different women from all different walks of life. And we realized that we really needed to do a relief effort. So we went to do a relief effort, and it would have been easy, so much easier, just to buy gift cards to the grocery store and allow for the women to be able to go and treat themselves, to feed their families. And what we ended up, because we went from the balcony to the weeds, we realized that there was a need for them to give to their community. So to allow them to, not even to allow them, to give them funds to plan to go to the grocery store to buy the foods for their community and to make the meals was so more fulfilling than just a gift card could do. So I think when you keep going between the balcony and the weeds is when you start to see what needs to happen with more clarity.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about some of the approaches and ways of thinking that help you change perspective and have helped me change perspective. And even though I think about this all the time, because I love these terms and I like to think about this and talk about it with my colleagues, almost every day it is a change of perspective that allows something to open up. So let's just talk about a couple of them. We've identified them. They're not our ideas. They're ideas that come from the field that we want to share with this group. So let's talk about.
I want to point out this picture, Sarah, just because
sure.
it's a bunch of hemp rope, and the idea of of one idea or one thread does not make for a strong rope, but the combination of several threads together make for strength. And as you get closer, you see it differently, and as you pull away, you get yet another view. Beautiful.
Okay. So the first thing we wanted to talk a little bit about, Justin, you can shift to the next slide, is the idea. I think I'll speak for myself and for all of these rooms I've been in where we're gathered as arts leaders, is that everybody talks about being mission driven. Mission driven. Are we mission aligned? Are we mission driven? Is it mission critical? And those are really important questions to ask. One thing that has helped me when I am stuck, or when my organization or my group is stuck, is to actually say, what other questions should we be asking? And one emerging, at least it's been named a lot more recently, is the idea of values-based leadership. And I want to talk about Arts Emerson for a minute, because I think they are a beautiful living example of this. And I actually talked to David House on Monday about this. We spent some time on it. He gave his blessing for us to talk about this. But he shared that they lead with values. If you go to their website, they talk about how empathy is what's going to mend the world. And they know that art creates empathy and is a tool for empathy. And so their work, they have a mission and it's important, but there are values behind it. And he said, we start almost every meeting talking about what are our values, even if it's a budget meeting, right? Or a scheduling meeting, because your values play out in those places. And he said that during the pandemic, they had established the idea that their values would lead with their funders, their staff, their audience members. One of their values is about transparency. And so they've had meetings where $1 million donor is next to an intern and their ideas are both welcome. And so this practice of values changed what they did during the pandemic. And their question wasn't, what do we have to do that's mission critical? Although I'm sure that was a question. Their question was, how do we live into our values in this time? And they decided to privilege BIPOC artists and give them the attention and the money because they believed that was the right thing to do behind their values. And no, they had no pushback. None, not from white artists, not from their funders, because they had been leading from a place of values. And the picture that's on the screen really speaks to me to this. It doesn't say up next with I mean, sometimes it does, it announces the show, but they also spend a lot of energy putting things on their marquee that say things like this: we choose inclusivity, generosity, art, curiosity, and compassion. So I think this is a really interesting thing that you can bring into a hard place, a hard conversation, a leadership issue, a conflict, and say, what are our values? And how's that going to help us get through this? And then you don't know what's going to happen because something will open up. All right, let's talk about another possible lens that might be useful for adapting leadership. Heather, you can, this is, yeah.
Sure. This is service-based leadership, which is my favorite thing in the whole wide world. I love it. Simon Sinek is an incredible author, speaker who talks a lot about servant and service-based leadership. I love this quote from Leaders Eat Last, which I'm going to read. Leadership takes work. It takes time and energy. The effects are not always easily measured, and they are not always immediate. Leadership is always a commitment to human beings. And thinking about, and there's an image of a tree with the roots kind of digging into the ground. And the idea that those who are leading organizations, who are CEOs, CFOs, COOs in organizations and companies, that if they're on the top, they have all of this power. But if you flip that organizational chart over, you have service-based leadership. So you have the heads of the organization at the bottom of the chart, and they become the roots of the tree. And so if we think about a tree as the organization, then you have your leadership that is supplying the nutrients, that's supplying the water, that's supplying the stability, and it's allowing for the organization to grow and flourish with the people it has enlisted with the work and has hired for the work, and it's taking care of the people. So I just think that this is such a beautiful image, and I use this a lot in class to talk about how you need to lead to inspire people and basically grow new leaders, and how it's not about reaching this level of power or privilege or title, but it's about serving the organization and the work that you're doing. The key element to servant leadership is to serve others. It's a genuine motivation to do good, to hold oneself to a higher standard, and give the structure that the organization needs to actually do the work that your mission has been called, that you're called to do.
And I just want to say, I really believe in vision from leaders, but I also believe that there are times when the leader may not have the vision, or has a cloudy vision, or is in a territory they don't understand. And I think often they turn to technical solutions because they're supposed to be the visionary. And visionary was a big word in our first word cloud. And what this approach allows you to do is say, the vision for this might have to come from the group. The vision from this might come from somewhere else. And how can I create the conditions for that to happen? Because that's what's going to help us out of this. That's going to help our new path. And what's scary about that is sometimes that means there might not be a place for you, or it means that your place might be different, or you have to hold the space differently. But if you can make yourself do it, I think all kinds of things happen that are a surprise, that are experimental, that help you find a new path. And this can even happen with technical things like, we have to make budget cuts. How are we going to do it in an adaptive time where you're trying to become something else? Maybe that's not a decision that gets made the way it usually does. Maybe you create conditions for it to be worked out another way, and it's tense and you hold that place, but it leads to something. And so this is a really important idea. And so we've talked about values-based leadership, and then this idea of service-based leadership. Heather, did you want to say anything else about this before we introduce a third concept?
I think this is one of the places where you feel that your leader, the person leading the organization, has your back. You don't feel like you're kind of just kind of floating in the breeze by yourself, that you're actually, you've got a team behind you. Mm-hmm. And that the risks, you're allowed to take risks in a service-based leadership model. Your staff is allowed to take risks because you're always there to kind of catch them. And I think that's a really great way of framing this type of leadership.
And that might be true even if you have to lay off some of those people.
Yeah.
Like they may be able to help suggest, create, define some way that works or happens that's better for the organization. Or so it's not just when it's really nice that this works, but when difficult, hard things are getting figured out, this can be a tool. Let's talk about the next one. This is an idea that I'm actually bringing forward from one of my broadband partners, Lori Taylor, who's an educator. And she's been talking to us about courage. And she's a follower of Parker Palmer, who's a writer about education and leadership, and is part of the Center for Courage and Renewal. And we were actually in a meeting last week, and I was struggling with something really adaptive. Like I was trying to do all the things I know how to do to solve it. And I said, I just need to have a level head about this. She said, I don't think so. She said, I actually think that we should think about courage in this moment, and where does it come from? And so just you probably know, but the word courage comes from the Latin word cor, which is heart. Cœur in French, coraggio, which is bravery from the heart in Italian. And this goes against the idea that emotion gets in the way of good leadership, and instead suggests that if you actually bring your feelings and your spiritual life and your full self and let that be part of how you're making a decision and how your organization or your class or your artist group is making a decision, it actually might lead you somewhere surprising. And I think, I've been in a million meetings where we go down some emotional rabbit hole and it's not productive. That's not what I'm talking about. But I am talking about living with integrity and letting people bring their whole self into the process. And so this quote I have here is actually not from this book. It's from another book, but it's from the blurb of a book about teaching that Parker Palmer was one of the writers in. And this is about teachers, but it applies to leaders. And that's why I have it here. The connection made by good teachers / leaders are held not in their methods, but in their hearts, the place where intellect, emotion, spirit, and will converge in the human self, supported by the community that emerges among us when we choose to live authentic lives. And I, during this pandemic, have felt people have been much more courageous. They're showing their houses behind them. Everybody's life is on display. Your kids are in the background, your dog, whatever. I also think that there is no way somebody can fake the bravado that they know what the hell to do, right? And so it's not that they don't have skills and intelligence, but there is something about allowing this to be an element in your decision making. And if there's a tough board meeting, not saying, well, let's just lay out pros and cons, but asking, how do you feel? What do you need? Well, how do you think the staff is feeling? How can we find out? And that information may be you adapting to a different way of working, but it also may change where you go and what happens. And it's a really interesting lens to bring to problems. All right, let's look at the last one.
My favorite.
Actually, I think there's two. Okay, there was a piece in the New York Times this weekend, y'all, about these two ladies, and they have a rubber chicken with them. And this article talked about how humor leads to bigger bottom lines and how it also builds better culture in organizations. And I was a little surprised, and I like funny, but these are two women from Stanford who teach at Stanford. And they've actually been studying this in relationship to business and leadership. And they have a new book, which you can see here. So this is Jennifer Aker and Naomi Bagdonas. But some of the things that they bring forward about humor are helpful because we take everything very seriously. And there's something about actually, looking at context. It's all really serious. And also, how serious is it? That's one question. A second question is, what do comedians do? What do fools do in Shakespeare's plays? What is the guy in the back row who says the wry things that makes you? They're truth tellers. They're telling you the truth. And there's a way in which if you can bring humor into a meeting, it actually is a kind of transparency. And it also, it's a way of allowing truths that maybe aren't at the top of the agenda to be present. And I have to dig in more into this myself because I just read the article like 2 days ago, but it seemed worth bringing forward because it's also surprising at a moment in time when, there's not a lot, we're not really laughing, to have a whole theory about humor-based leadership being both great for culture, problem solving, and for economic growth in your organization. So let's all read this book. Maybe we can talk more about it at another time. And then the last one, I think Heather was going to talk for a moment about.
Sure. So, this, well, be strange, be weird, throw stuff on the wall, see what sticks. Adapted. This is from the Leadership on the Line book by Ronald Heifetz and Marty Linsky. Adaptive challenges disturb the norms of the culture, therefore require some abnormality. It doesn't mean all norms change, but some norms must. For change to happen, some idea has to be imported from a different environment or exploited internally from a deviant voice within. So that staff member who's always picking at something, or always has a different view, and this may be the time to tap their brain about what their ideas about a certain situation is. And it's just, it goes along with the humor, I think, in that sometimes the most bizarre ideas get traction.
Mm-hmm.
So don't be afraid to be strange.
Yeah. And I think all of these ideas, which are about not using technical solutions, leading into a new side of a new metaphor for leadership, maybe, understanding that you have to stay in a healthy state of disequilibrium, and then some approaches to doing that, which might be asking different questions or using different frames, are all ways maybe to get unstuck. And if you start using this language with your board, your artists, your staff, your bandmates, your classroom, it something probably will shift. And that's the idea. It gets adapted and it changes. So that was kind of our flyover of some big concepts. And we thought it might be useful to then talk about, okay, these are all great, interesting ideas to think about. How do they actually apply? Because we have real problems. We have staff problems. We have programming issues. We have financial issues. We have a totally changing landscape. Like, how do we apply these? And honestly, we don't know, because we're in this adaptive time. So what we did is we looked to some interesting folks that are part of our community, either our geographic community or the arts community or sectors that work with us, and picked some examples that maybe concretize some of this and show how it's been applied in interesting ways. And we wanted to share some of those samples with you about staff, budgeting, and programming.
So the first one is really looking at our people. Create a culture of compassion and the work will follow. So the idea, this goes back to the service, leadership, as well as values, as well as adaptive. It kind of rolls it all into a nice ball when you're looking at your staff and you're realizing that without them, you don't have an organization. And it's important to take care of the people so they take care of you. So there's some really great, there's some really great examples that I want to throw out. There was an organization that I heard about, and I have, for the life of me, tried to find this news report again, but I can't. It was many months ago, but it was around July, August. And it was a small arts organization, not in Boston, I think somewhere in the South, and they were looking at furloughs and layoffs. And the leadership decided that instead of rolling out a bunch of layoffs and furloughs, what they would do is go to the staff and ask for some ideas. And what ended up happening was a volunteer furlough program. And so those in the organization who felt as though they could afford to take a furlough or a leave of absence actually did so, whereas the younger staff, the staff who had just purchased a house or had babies, were the staff that were kept on full time. So there was this community of compassion and this culture of compassion that had been built in this organization that allowed for that adaptive solution to work and be successful. There's another great story about, over the summer when Harvard announced for furloughs and layoffs of support staff. And in the end, they put a halt to that and gave some voluntary workforce programs instead, such as early retirement, voluntary vacation balance reduction, time reduction, so that there could be more of an equal balance between the support staff, those who could afford to be out of work and those who couldn't, who weren't able to.
I want to jump in on that one because
Sure.
the practice of going to the balcony and back to the weeds is how they made that decision. They had a way of determining layoffs, which I don't know exactly what it was, but
Yeah.
I think there's a standard way of like, who do we need? What's productive? What would save money? You look at different scenarios. They were not looking at the context of racial justice. And when they actually decided to do this, what it meant was that the majority of a large percentage of their staff of color were in these support roles. So by making these furloughs, they were going to be laying off a huge number of Black, Indigenous people of color. And that when they realized that was they were using the wrong approach to make this decision, they had to go back to the drawing board and hear a different voice and change the way they made that decision. And they did it in the press. I mean, they rolled it in and they rolled it out. They did it publicly. They changed their mind.
That was, and they're looking at a $750 million shortfall, revenue shortfall in this fiscal year. So this is, I think, a great example of values-based leadership, to go back to your values and think what is important to us.
Right. And I just want to say, Deborah Cash, my friend Deborah Cash, just put a comment in that is true, which is there was also huge public outcry, and this would have done real public damage to them. But that's actually important. They had to listen to a different voice than their accountants, and they had to make a change, and they had to do it publicly. And we're not saying it's all values-based. We're saying that they adapted.
Yeah. And the announcement to halt the furloughs came about an hour before a big protest was planned. So absolutely, Deborah. The voices are important, and to raise, and to have your voices, and to have voices be heard and allow for them to come through. Mm-hmm. The other example I wanted to is from my own kind of experience when, I'm a college professor, and I'm a college professor of theater students. So once the lockdown happened, we were in the midst of staging. We were about to go into tech for Violet the musical, which we were so proud of. And Maurice Parent was the director, and it was a beautiful piece, and we had to cancel it. And so there was this kind of devastation within our student body. And so what ended up happening was I realized, and several of, and our department realized, that the care of our students was more important than the content of the rest of the syllabus and the rest of the semester. So we, in my class, we had long check-ins where we really checked in with people to see where people were, how they were doing. And it's grown into something that I do on a regular basis now. And now students bring in different questions to ask during the check-in for the rest of their colleagues in the class. So it's interesting that we're now building community in a college class based, on the fact that we've had to lock down and we're on Zoom for our classrooms. So context, looking at the context of the classroom, looking beyond the curriculum to see the people, the students who are taking your classes, and how important to support their lives. And in that, do you want to say anything more about that, Sarah?
No, actually, if you have a final word on that, and then I'd love to talk about finances.
Okay, I just want to go to the next slide, just really quickly, to finding balance, because if we're caring for all of these other people, and our staff and our students, and trying to make sure that everyone's okay, we can't neglect ourselves in the process. But one of the things that Simon Sinek teaches is that when you take care of the people take care of us, and they take care of the business. So to really care about the people in your charge is to actually to the bottom line actually grows, and your business flourishes once you really care for those individuals and they are seen and heard. So shall we jump into finances now?
There's
Sarah?
a pain point for everybody. And I'm going to tell the story that's not from the arts community, but it's a story of a church, and it was my church. And I had just taken these classes with Ronnie Heifetz, and this is a church in Arlington that's called Pleasant Street Church. It had 168 years of ministry. It was a foundational organization in the town of Arlington. It was a lead social justice worker. It was a gathering place, and it ran out of money. And the church, through a long process, made a decision to close and sell the building. Congregational churches own their own building. They hire their own pastor. They're not part of a larger church like the Catholic Church where they own their own buildings, right? And so there was this asset sitting there, this church. And once we decided to close, it was like, okay, we're going to sell the church. Where does the money go? And I'm telling you that every single person had an opinion about where the money should go, what should happen with it, how it should happen. And there was tension immediately. And it was not just tension about that. It was tension of things that had been in the church, right? There's tensions in communities and in this church, and competing points of view about establishment versus risky new initiatives, and about taking care of just your town or take care of people out in the world. And we paused it, partly because I'd taken this class, and said, you know what, let's not decide where the money is going. Let's decide what we care about and what the shared criteria for our whole church might be for deciding where money would go. This was not a process the church ever did. This is a grant process. They'd never done that. That was not a model that they understood, and everybody embraced it, and they didn't know what it would mean. And they put together this group that was like, an old Republican guy in his 80s, and like a young mentally ill woman who's super progressive, and like, a lot of different personalities who designed a set of criteria that reflected the values of the church and the history of the church. And then we said to everyone, put in proposals that meet these criteria. If they can be anything. And then we took all of them and we made this giant plan that included all of them. And when we brought it back to the church, and it would not have looked like this through any traditional process, brought it back to the church, a friend of mine said, this is not what I would do, but boy, does this look like us. And so that's how we did it. And I love that story because the way that we made a probably the most important decision that happened in the last 10 years of the church was by doing something completely that we did never done before, with voices that usually weren't together, through a process people hadn't done. And it led us to a place that we didn't expect. And it was a wonderful decision. And I learned a lot. So I wanted to share that as a personal sort of application of some of these ideas. I have one other that I'd like to share too. And this is about a small nonprofit called Miranda's Hearth, which is run by Miranda Ashling, who founded it. And she's a community arts leader. And she leads events. And sorry, my dog is barking. She leads events and she builds community through art projects. And I talked to her before this and asked for her blessing to share this story, because I think it's an interesting financial story. During the pandemic, she had a whole bunch of big events planned to do community arts work. And as soon as the shutdown happened, she pivoted. Technically, she's very skilled, pivoted to online, started holding all these online, still on mission. And she and her board started to talk about the fact that changed her job. And they had to there was a discussion, because she said, actually, I'm now being an arts therapist because it's one-on-one with small groups. It's not a macro community arts in relationship to the community. So how are we going to navigate this? And rather than doing strategies and plans, they talked about how they felt. And Miranda said, I feel exhausted and the field is flooded with people trying to do what we're doing, what if we actually, and we have some money in the bank, what if we go on hiatus? And she said, we didn't go on hiatus because we couldn't do mission related work or because it wasn't working for people. But she said, everyone's going to be exhausted at the end of this pandemic, and I'm going to have fuel in my tank, and I'm going to have some money in the bank. And then I can rethink, what does community arts look like in this new moment? And she had to do a whole process with her board, which was not their normal process. Looking at the budget, looking at programming, analyzing data. They were responding to a new context of what other arts organizations were doing and their own orientation to it. And so they are on hiatus. They still are alive, but they're on hiatus. And Miranda, went in the meantime and took a job as a community arts person at the Cape Ann Museum. And she's actually doing what she was made to do. She's actually now doing community arts the way she's supposed to be doing it. And it took a completely different path than anyone would have anticipated. And I wanted to share here that she's put together a COVID-19 memorial that is open this week at the Cape Ann Museum. And if for those who need a description, it is a set of cairns and stones in memory of people who have passed away from COVID-19, and it is outdoors and it is beautifully lit and it is open. So I loved the way that the financial thinking about those two led to a place you would never expect and actually led to a beautiful result. Yeah. I just want to say a word too, and this is a more technical thing, but scenario budgeting in this time, lots of scenarios, not passing an annual budget, doing a budget that's quarterly, doing a budget that you roll into every month, having micro budgets for different things. Like those are all things that could adapt and be tried in your organizations. And a lot of you are doing them. I actually have heard models from some of you that I'm learning from. But I don't think that we just apply these big ideas to people and art. I think we have to apply them to structures and money and schedules. And so I just want to invite some interesting thinking about how you do that. And these are two models for that. Yeah. And then our last thing is really around programming.
Yep.
I'm guessing that in this room, there is so much adaptive programming happening that is so stellar, and a lot of people are living into it. And I would invite are you doing humor-based thinking? Are you doing value-based thinking? Are you thinking about service? And if you're stuck on something, maybe some of those ideas would help. We wanted to highlight two projects that we think are really interesting programming that have adapted during this time through a new path that they didn't know where they would go. Heather, you want to do the first one?
Sure. Starlight Square in Cambridge, with a collaboration between the Central Square Business Council and Central Square Theater. They created a space in a parking lot that they were able to have for performances. It was a place where people could come and tell stories, have meetings, have church services, have performances. And one of the great kind of weeks of week-long cabaret series was done in collaboration with the Front Porch Collective. And what they did was they had the artists that they hired, they actually put them on an equity contract, which they didn't necessarily need to, and a full week's contract. And then all the proceeds actually went to those individual artists. So shifting from we've got to bring in money, kind of for ourselves, really giving to the artists in the community that were really struggling. And this became a place, a community space that was really allowed to allow people to share their art in a very valuable, important way during this time.
Yeah, and what I love about that too is it was not that the arts organization figured out their values and their approach. They talked to like the community center, they talked to the bank, they worked with the dance, like there were all these different organizations, and their frame was the community, not their organization. And I think that that was a way that they found a way forward through all that collaboration, which I just really celebrate. And their programming has been dynamite. The last thing I wanted to highlight here, and this is a project that I'm involved with at Broadband, but I mention it because Latitudes is a virtual performance series. But what happened there is there are 8 artists, each from a different discipline, a different cultural background, a lot of racial diversity, a lot of diversity of geography. You know, one of them is in California, there's some in New York. They came into a room to ask questions with us. How do we create content in this moment? Is there something important to say or not? Do I have anything to say? How do you actually connect meaningfully with audience during this time? Can it be monetized? And so it was actually, we didn't know that we were going to do a series. We had inklings of what it could be, but actually the questions led. And it is like one of the most dynamic series that I've seen, because those artists rose up and answered those questions or challenged those questions and shifted to connecting with each other outside of meetings and making things they'd never met before. They met on Zoom. And we may not do it again. Like it's not that we were creating a replicable model. We actually did it to learn. And I think for us at Broadband, the question is, we have questions and we want to create a learning space. So that's a different question than we might normally ask about, like, what programs can we put out there that are really exciting and create a big revenue model for us. We wanted to test and question, and it gave us a path forward that has led to something that surprised us. So anyway, check it out. Pretty good. All right. I think we are, let's see the next slide, Justin. We are coming to the point where we want to have some conversation and questions.
Yep.
So I just want to do it like a 30-second recap on looking at problems that you don't have the skills, expertise, and experience to address. Holding a space of disequilibrium, changing your frame as you talk about these things and make decisions, and accepting that you're going to end up somewhere you don't expect. And this, for me, as someone who, I do a lot of strategic plans, we want to be here. Here's what we need to do to get there. That is not what this is. This is, something isn't right. We have a new context. We need to get somewhere. What questions should we be asking? We might go somewhere I don't like, but it might be right. You know, there might be casualties. Somebody may not like it, and that may be okay. Those are tough adaptive things, and it's hard to hold that as a leader. But if you embrace it and change your metaphor for leadership so that you're the roots of the tree, and maybe vision is called for most of the time, but maybe in this moment it's not, or maybe it is. You know, maybe you're used to being a cheerleader for people, and what you actually need to do is let them help you in this moment. Like something needs to shift. And we would love to talk with you about your thoughts about this, questions, examples. Michael from the MCC is collecting questions and comments if there are any, and he's going to share them with us.
Hi, everyone. All right. So I'm just going to give a quick little closer. And while you're thinking of some questions, because we don't have any yet, while you're thinking of some questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to present that to our host today. Just looking ahead to the rest of the week, we've got a great session with the Arts and Business Council on Thursday about all the issues that managers and directors need to know about unemployment obligations with within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and what you're required to do when it comes to unemployment. We have a lawyer who will be helping us with that. That is on Thursday. And looking ahead to the rest of the month, we have a good two-parter on strategic self-care. And I view this as a second part to some of our other leadership things that we've been working on, working from home, creating a safe space, a conductive space for us to be able to be productive and to manage our work there. But also, how do we take care of ourselves? And this could be a leadership part. This could be something with your staff as well. And that's a two-parter that's March 18th and 25th. 5th. And then we've got 2 last sessions on legal issues for arts administrators. The first one is on March 16th, and that's about how you suspend operations completely and also closure. So if those are important to you, feel free to know that we will have attorneys on that talking about what is the process to completely suspend operations, not just hibernate, but suspend and close up completely. And then on March 23rd, we have one on mergers and absorptions. And so a lot of folks thinks that, with COVID, that nonprofit field is merging. We actually haven't seen that a lot. What we're seeing is a lot of other agencies absorbing other institutions who are finding it hard to continue past COVID. So those are very 2 specialized, very unique workshops. If that's interesting to you, feel free to do that. That's also with the Arts and Business Council of Greater Boston.
Michael, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
I'm curious how you feel, what you feel at the Mass Cultural Council right now. Are there areas that you have all had to pull on your technical leadership? And are there other areas that you feel are adaptive areas, and how are you dealing with it?
Looking internally in the work of the council?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would say, first of all, we get our adaptive work based on the conversations we have with the field. And so I know a lot of our folks here in the group, and that's a result of our many years of relationship building. And so we had that conversation. That's actually one of the things that formed this series in the first place, is that we actually called 300 of our operating support grantees in the fall and checked in. We made the first attempt and said, how are you doing? What's going on? What are the challenges you're facing? What do you need from us that we're not delivering, or that only we can deliver and you can't get it from a community foundation or maybe another spot? And so it became very clear on what the services of Mass Cultural Council needed to do in order to respond to this need. We've never done 42 webinars before. Are we going to do 42 webinars in the future? I'm not so sure about that either. But it was definitely neat. And these are very niche, small topics where we're talking about, like you said, Sarah, doing your chart of accounts for bookkeeping in the new area, all the way to adaptive leadership, all the way to legal issues of unemployment law. I mean, they're very all over the place, and it's intended to be that because the need is so varied. And so I would say when this first came out, the first thing was, let's get out of the way as much as we could. So we got rid of deadlines. We put as much operating support we could out into the field. We actually had some emergency funds that we reallocated from other programs that we're not going to continue just because of closures, like the field trip program that we have, the yellow school bus program that obviously wasn't able to be in schools. And so redirected as much as we could. And so I think part of that is just having conversations and having a dialogue. And we kind of build that on what we call trust-based philanthropy. And then the last thing I see when it's kind of adaptive, it's also part of the culture that we've had for a long time of really being able to shift as much as we can, as much as a government agency can actually do that. I mean, obviously there's restrictions and there's guidelines of what we can do, but to really say, how do we provide value to the field and how do we do that quickly? And so that's been something that we've done for a long time. So it kind of came natural to us.
Yeah. Can I just name something? Because I think all of those things you're talking about take tremendous integrity and thought and skill, but I think they're also slightly technical because the Mass Cultural Council is a listening organization that responds to the field. That is what you do. I would posit just from the outside that your choice of a new executive director and the priorities around racial justice and being disruptive in certain ways. I mean, I read his article about boards and whether we need them and why are they that way, and maybe we need to disrupt that. I think that there is some interesting adaptive behavior that's already beginning to be at the leadership of the Mass Cultural Council, and I'm guessing that you all don't know where that means you're going to end up. And so I'm curious how you will be thinking about these things internally. And I only ask because it's such a moment of flexion for the field and you're such a leader in the field. I just find it fascinating and wanted to ask you about it.
Yeah, I'm curious where we're going too. I mean, this is all you talked about. We don't know where the road is going. When you have new leadership, that's definitely part of the equation. I think this is a combination of many things coming together. Where we've had you talked about the series of crises. We've had multiple crises over the last year. I think we're going to get out of COVID before too long, we're moving that direction. Systemic racism is much deeper and much longer and needs much more resources to address. And so we're super excited to work on that. And as a funder and as a listening organization, as you mentioned, there are words and then there are actions. And just because you say something doesn't mean, if you don't have actions to support that, whether it comes into services or grant formulas or applications, or I mean, there's a lot of different places you can go. Those words really don't mean that much. And so we're super excited to come along this journey with Michael Bobbitt, our new executive director.
Michael Bobbitt.
For everybody
Michael
who might
Bobbitt.
not know, who was
Okay,
actually just
so-
testifying this morning at the House Committee for funding
Amazing.
for next year.
So there's a note from Charles in that he was not able to ask a question during the Q&A platform. So I don't know if anybody did have something they wanted to ask and wanted to put in the chat, but if you do, you can put it there. And even if we don't get to it, we can get in touch with you afterwards.
Yeah, folks can do that. Charles, that may just be because you were a panelist today. So if
Right.
someone wanted to ask a question, absolutely.
Okay.
I haven't seen any.
In the meantime, what we thought we would do to reflect on what we just said as a group is to do a second mentee. And so if people are game, I would so invite you to get your phone.
Absolutely.
And I want to ask the same question, but I really invite you to think about it, not in terms of what are the metaphors of leadership you currently lean into, but are there some new metaphors for leadership you want to explore? In light of what we talked about, maybe not. And maybe you'd put the same ones. But after you've heard this, is there anything that maybe you think, here's a new metaphor for leadership that that I'd like to explore? Maybe it's I want to be a questioner, or I want to be a guide, or I want to be a steward, you know. And if people would go on and add those, Justin can share a word cloud from the end of this, and we can kind of see where people's heads are at. So the website is menti, menti.com. And the code is 15473578.
Sarah and Heather, can I ask you a question? How about that? We'll go this way.
Sure.
I know you are doing 2 more sessions with us later on in this year. Can you just give me a brief overview so folks can kind of know what to expect from those?
Sure. We are doing a April 1st, I believe it is, webinar on how to connect with audiences virtually in a meaningful way. And this will be with Kristen Canterbury Bagnall, my partner at Broadband, and with actress Bobby Steinbach. We have created several shows over the course of this pandemic that have been online on Twitch, on YouTube, on Facebook, using StreamYard, having interaction with the audience, having feedback from the audience. And I also have been working really closely with Arlequin Players Theater, which had a really big viral virtual theater hit, which we took on a virtual tour. And so part of what we've been reflecting on is what are the practices that allow for meaningful audience engagement online? And that should be really fun. We have a lot of video, and we'd love to have people who also are doing that share what they're doing. So, and then in May, we're going to do one on virtual fundraising, which is something that we do and have done successfully in a bunch of different models. And will be fun to share that during what is usually gala season, and as people are finalizing their budgets for next year, or maybe not, because maybe they're adapting the way they do that. So the first one's on audience on the virtual world. The second one's on fundraising in the virtual world.
Great. I do have a question that I would love to pose to you both. And our folks who are leaders who are executive directors, and they're balancing working with a board. Speaking of board, Sarah, you brought up the article, and also being a leader to their staff. And sometimes to be an adaptive leader requires a fair amount of risk that maybe a board member or a board as a whole may not want to go down a road, particularly when we've got a crisis that we have, and financial management is really, really important in a lot of other areas. So what kind of advice or strategy could you give to an executive director who's being adaptive, who's taking some of these values-based work that you have talked about today, and being able to work with the board to help them see the advantages of that work?
I think I'll go and then you go. I think
Yeah.
there's a way in which don't you don't start making the decisions. You actually spend time, like you have a retreat, you have a couple of hours, you all write something, you all read the same book, you take yourselves out of your normal context. And then you figure out together, how are we going to make these decisions? Right? What questions are we asking? So you actually back off the hard question, not to avoid it and not to put it off, but to actually create a space which is an adaptive disequilibrium that you agree to be in. And then you figure out from there, okay, why are we asking these questions? Who could be in the room? What if we did it differently? What values are behind this? And together, that's hard. That's hard. But if you do that, then a process can come out of it. And so I would say, you have a board where you have amazing fiscal management, but they're completely clueless about racial equity. And then you have a staff that's incredibly progressive about racial equity, but they're new and they're whatever. I think you take a scenario like that and maybe you bring some people together from both, and you don't talk about what are we going to do with the budget and what are we going to do with the programming. You talk about what do we value, you use some of these frames, and the other thing that Ronnie Heifetz talked about so clearly is there are going to be casualties. If you're part of a founding group of actors and then the company decides to go a different direction, you might lose one of your founding members. And that's okay, because they did the thing and now maybe this isn't right for them anymore and they can't be there, but it's the right thing. And I think we're very afraid of those casualties. What if we get bad press? What if this person leaves? We need them. Yes and no, like if you're going to become something different, maybe you need different people. Or maybe you need a different plan. So that would be my answer. What would you say, Heather?
Yeah,
I
I
would
was
say
just
real quick, if I could, Sarah, you said, what if we lose that person? I just want to add what a lot of folks are saying. What if we lose the donation that comes along with that person is
Yeah.
also a major part of that. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, so that maybe it's worth it.
And I think you've got to go back to your values. And really look at what's important, and bringing those groups together. If you've got, as Sarah said, a really progressive, active staff and a more conservative board, bringing them together, getting them to know one another in an outside space. I think it's really important. I've worked with Sarah and under Sarah at different organizations where it seems really important to actually get out of your offices, get out of your normal spaces, to have these conversations, because getting out of that to kind of disrupt the norm, and to get to know one another and to build community. And those conversations tend to be easier, and the solutions start to become clear, or the path you're going, once you kind of build that community. And I think that's what you were saying.
Yeah, and also on Zoom, that's hard. But
Really
maybe you say, we're going to do a meeting on a Saturday and everyone bring your coffee. And you just change the environment. I think that's a major thing. The other thing about donations, Carol Charno, who runs the Boston Children's Museum and is a great mentor to many executive directors in this town, including me, tells an incredible story about the book company, the publisher of Mein Kampf in the United States still sells it. And they take the proceeds and give it to some kind of an education or social justice organization. Like, they're very clear on why they sell it and what they do with the proceeds. And Carol is a Jewish leader of a children's museum, and they approached her to give her the funds. And it was a huge amount of money, and it was going to allow a whole bunch of things. And she did a discernment process around it and turned it down. And it opened up what ended up happening is the press did a piece about it. And then all these other donations came forward. Now, that's not always what happens. Sometimes you lose a big donor and then you have to rethink your programming, but you're living into your values and maybe you're doing something different. Maybe you change your size. And it's a loss, but it's an adaptation that takes you forward.
I think Michael, you had a great example when you work for an organization in Western Mass, I think it was, where a donation that had very specific restrictions put on it that did not line up with the mission and the values of the organization. And I think it was multi-billion dollar donation or or planned giving something. And you turned it down because it didn't align with your values.
Yeah, I went through something like that before I came to the council as a development person, and having that conversation, being clear about that before that, I don't want to say it makes the decision easier, but it's there, and it all goes against that, and say, okay, is this it? And then thinking about who the organization actually serves and the constituents, and if it creates harm for them, then it's a real clear picture of where your values should be. So sometimes the dollars can supersede judgment when it comes to that, but that conversation of values and purpose helps really lead that direction.
I know we're almost at time, Michael. Can I just point to the slide for a second?
That's perfect. That's where we're going.
Okay. And I did want to quickly say too, we're talking about staff and board a lot. Don't forget young people. Don't forget to have youth in the room. Don't forget to have audience in the room.
All your stakeholders.
Change conversation. Okay. So I love this because I think visionary was one of the biggest words last time, and now facilitator is in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And this doesn't mean that you don't pull out your visionary self and do all your technical chops that you are badass at. You do that. And in an adaptive process, maybe you do one of these others.
And questioner.
We have a list of resources that we wanted to just put here. And I know Michael's going to send a list out as well. But we just have a final slide. If you have things to close up with, Michael, maybe Justin can just put that resource slide up as we close.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you for everybody for, finding an hour and a half. I know that's really hard when we're all pushed in 1,000 directions. And I also want to thank Sarah, Heather, you as well, Charles for hanging in on us, and Justin for making sure that all the technology worked with us today. It was a huge help to make sure that we all got access to this wonderful content. As I said before, this was recorded, and this will be on our YouTube channel tomorrow. So you are free to check that tomorrow, but you'll get a link from me with the resources once it's available.
Thank you so much to the Mass Cultural Council for doing these, and for anyone who chose to spend an hour plus with us. It was our pleasure.
Absolutely. So don't forget to be strange, be courageous, and use one another as a resource.
Great. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.